All right. So, Blender Workshop Part 1. For the most part, after going through the Maya workshop a few weeks ago, I'm going to try to be less theory and more seeing and doing. Okay, now what is Blender? Blender is an open source, community-driven 3D software. You can use it to make games, films, or commercials. Its workflow and its tools are very popular in the games than in film. Blender is considered like one of the best free 3D software, and it's very similar to the tools in Autodesk Maya. Which is industry standard. You can 3D model, texture, animate. You can simulate, dynamics like fluid, cloth, hair particles, and you can also optimize, photo scanned objects. Now, as you may know, at EML or EBC, everyone works with Unity quite often for their projects. For the most part, everything in Blender can be imported into Unity as long as it's exported in, as a .fbx or .obj. There's a typo here, or a .blend file, not a .mab. And you can export models, textures, and animation. There are other 3D software that works well with Unity, and I can also hold a workshop for them as well later down in the future. And there's, Maya, ZBrush, Marvelous Designer, Substance Painter, and Substance Designer. Tell you a little bit about each real quick. Maya, is like Blender. You can do a bunch of stuff. ZBrush is mainly like modeling or sculpting, and you can have some really nice fine details. Marvelous Designer is a cloth sim program, so you can export nicely simulated cloth. Substance Painter and Substance Designer is a texturing program / texture generator. So specifically, Substance Painter and Substance Designer is popular in texturing in games because you can also make textures that are tileable, so they can be repeated, and you can use it over and over again. But anyways, so with Blender, it's known to be the most beginner-friendly. There are a lot of tutorials available. You just search it up on YouTube, on Google. It's a lot more user-friendly than Maya, but it is a lot more dependent on memorizing hotkeys and shortcuts, and I'll get to that soon enough. I've also linked a list of hotkeys as a PDF that are most popular, and you can click this link here in the PowerPoint. I will share this PowerPoint somewhere on the Slack maybe. However, in Blender, animation tools are still very limited. That can possibly change in the next several years, but for now, you can animate. Just to be clear, you just can't animate, things that are too complex. Complex animation would be something like character animation. Yeah, I can talk about that later. Now, finally, if you learn Blender, a lot of its terminology and concepts are shared between the other 3D software that I mentioned. And you can easily pick up another software once you get the hang of this. In this workshop, we will learn the interface, navigation, and basic modeling tools. And we'll see how much time we have, but we will at least model one of the following. It's either an apple, banana, or a donut. Leaning towards the donut for now. Okay, for the interface. I'm gonna actually get into Blender here. This is a screenshot. Let's see here. So when you download Blender, it's free. Anyone can download it. Don't worry about anything. This is the first screen that pops up. And it's like a Blender welcome screen. If you want to start, you just click, you can just click New File, General, and you'll start with a cube in the scene. And I'm going to quickly turn on Screencast. Keys. There you go. So you can see what I'm clicking. Great. Okay, so I'm gonna try to point with my cursor in terms of what things are. On the right side here on this bottom window, this is like your properties tab. So, anything from your tool properties to, object properties, you can hover over these, you'll find a lot of different settings here that you can adjust, like the position or rotation or scale. Up here, this is like the scene collection window. It's basically everything that you have in your Blender scene file. If you know Unity, this is like your inspector. It shows everything that's in your scene. And we have here, camera, cube, and our light source. Right here on the left, you'll see, your most common tools. You have your selection tools that you can hold and click, and you see all those different selection tools. You have your move tools, rotate, scale, and then even a gimbal tool. Let's see. Neat thing about Blender, you'll see that up here there's a lot of different tabs. I'm not going to get into these tabs in this workshop, but these are basically the other tabs you would go into for the other steps, like texturing, rendering, animation. By default, we are in the Layouts tab, and that'll be best to start out with. On the very bottom here, so just under this timeline, we call it, you'll see that there's tiny little cursors here and little descriptions of what different buttons do. That's something that is very, I guess, not proprietary, but I haven't seen this before in other programs, but it's helpful because it's always a small little quick tooltip on some of the controls you can press and what they do. Okay. So that's pretty much the interface. And I mean, I'll get into these tools when we get into navigation, which is now. So to first start with Blender, you first have to understand that how to navigate and how to move around and things like that. And to orbit, right, we're orbiting the camera that we're viewing in, and this is the viewport. We hold and drag middle mouse click, okay? So that's how we rotate. And you'll notice that, this little circle is rotating as I'm rotating this. Now, if sometimes, you may not have a middle mouse button, or, maybe you're on a trackpad or using a stylus pen, Blender actually has this feature where you can left-click drag around this little circle, and it'll rotate around for you, right? And if you click any of these axes or colors, it'll actually flip to those axes just like that, which is very cool, very helpful. Now, if this doesn't work for some reason, you can also rotate, you can pan with some of these tools. So there's a hand here that I can move around and pan. The shortcut for that is Shift and a middle mouse, right? So middle mouse rotate, Shift and middle mouse is pan, or you can go over here or here. For zoom, you can either scroll, or there's another magnifying glass here that you can click and drag to magnify. There's these two other buttons here. This basically toggles wherever your camera is set up in that camera view. And this button is basically changes it from a orthographic or perspective projection. So you'll see what that is in a very funky option. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here and talk about some of your selection tools. So we start here with a cube. If I left click, let's see default. If I left click, you see this orange highlight. This is pretty common actually in Unity as well, having an orange highlight. You'll see that you can't really edit the points. yet. One more thing to note in terms of navigation, let's say I have this cube somewhere, somewhere like, I don't know, like way over there, like off screen, and we're like, oh, I need to like move the camera over there. A quick way to do this is that while the object is selected, you can press the period key on your numpad, and it'll focus that camera right there. If your keyboard doesn't have a numpad, you can also go to View and then Frame Selected, and that's how you go over there. Okay, I'm going to Control Z that so it is back in the center. To move an object, we have these three main tools here. We have the Move tool, and you can click on this, and you can drag it across these axes. Or hotkey for that is pressing G. Now, when you press G, automatically it sticks to your cursor, and I can move it freely in free space. And this can be helpful, can be annoying sometimes. If you want to snap it to a certain axis, you can actually do it in two ways. Let's say I want to snap it along the y-axis. So it's this green line here. If I type in y while it's like floating in the air like this, it'll actually snap to that y-axis, and I can move it along there. Same thing if I snap it along the x or the z. Okay, if I want to cancel my movement, so like I don't want it to float around anymore, but I want it back to its original spot, I can just right click and it'll cancel that. If I wanted to accept that chain, accept that transformation, I just left click and it'll save that position. Another way to move it around space is after pressing G, I can hold a middle mouse and it'll actually automatically snap to the closest axes I wanted to move across. And this is going to come up quite often later. Okay. The next one is the rotate tool. And it's the same thing, you can rotate along whatever axes. For the rotate tools hotkey, it's R. And again, just pressing R, it rotates in free space, but I can type in any axes to rotate along there. Same thing with holding middle mouse, I can snap it to certain axes I want it to rotate it in, okay? And then there is a scale tool. And same thing, I can scale along different axes. And the hotkey for that is S, and it'll scale proportionately or along one of the axes by holding middle mouse or typing those following axes. Okay, there is one more tool that's basically a combination of all three. It's called, I call it the gimbal. Other people call it the transform. But if you click on this, you'll see that now this little cursor, you can move it around, you can rotate it, you can scale it, and it's all in one, so you don't have to keep switching in. Most people use the hotkeys, which is G, R, or S. But whatever is more comfortable for you, you can use whatever is necessary. Okay. So we're actually going to start some basic modeling. Today, let's try a donut. And I will go through some modeling theory at the same time, and also go over some other tools that you may encounter while modeling. So for now, we don't need a cube. We want a donut. So I'm going to press X to delete. You can also delete by pressing delete. Either works. To add an object to your scene, you hit Shift A. Okay, this brings up the add menu, and you can add any of these things, but we're going to go for mesh, and then go for a torus, which is this donut looking shape. A little Easter egg or fun fact, only in Blender you can find one of the basic objects, a monkey. So you can actually import a monkey. There's the monkey. As a starting object if you want, but we don't need no monkey. We will get our little donut, a torus. Now, sometimes in Blender, when you add something, a little box will appear here. If you open up this box, this is like the, I don't know, the construction history properties box. Let's call it that for short. Here we can adjust the how many segments it has. I don't know if you can see that. The segments it has, the minor segments. There's a major and minor. You can play around with these, and I can also change the the thickness, the radius, things like that. Let's try to get a donut-looking shape. So that looks pretty good. I always recommend that a lot of 3D software works based on units. So in Blender, by default, the units are in meters. So I mean, if we were to actually measure this donut is actually, what does it say? It's about 0.8 meters. That's 80 centimeters. That's a very large donut. For the most part, as long as it's proportionately correct or looks proportionally correct, we can always scale this down later on anyway, or in Unity or whatever. But it is smart and best to work in either real world measurements or something that is consistent in terms of whatever else you're modeling. So if, let's say that if my donut is 0.8 meters, my chair should not be 1 meter. It should be a lot larger than that. Keep it consistent in the units. But anyways, okay, let's say that's a nice looking donut. Another thing here for major and minor segments, this is where I can control, let's say, the division of faces on my model. Now you'll notice that as I raise this number, it starts getting smoother and smoother, less jagged and things like that. And this may look nice in the beginning, but for modeling things, you always want to start simple. Start with the least amount of segments, start with the least amount of faces to deal with. And this makes more sense later on when you model more complicated things. But this way, it's starting from like the simplest building blocks. You can always increase the subdivision levels or resolution of your model to make it smooth again anyway. And it's just easier to manage. Okay, if that is looking great, I'm just gonna left click outside and it's gonna deselect it. Now you'll also notice that when I did that, my whole box just disappeared. If I click on my object again, that box is now gone forever. Some objects in Blender, when you add, is only available when you first add it in. So if you click on something else by accident, you can't really get that menu back, which is a little annoying, but that's okay. Anyways, so we have this donut-looking thing. And let's talk about edit mode. So if I press tab, this goes into edit mode, which meaning that I can start actually playing around with the different components of this model. And there are 3 components that make up any kind of model. There is the vertices, which are these dots. Okay. There's an edge, which is basically 2 dots, or there's a face, which is either 3 or 4 dots. You can see that highlighted. There are hotkeys for different modes where you can select it at easier. Right now, it's in vertex mode, and it's up here, these 3 little buttons. If you hover over them, you'll see. The first one is vertices mode, so it's only the dots. If I click on the second one, now it's an edge mode. I can select by edges, and the third one is face mode, and I can select per face. The hotkeys for these, respectively, is 1 for vertices, 2 for edge, and 3 for face. Okay, and you can select and deselect these things by either clicking on them or clicking outside of your model. Blender also does have the option where if you hold Shift and Control, oh no, sorry, just Shift, I can actually turn all of these on, and I'll have the option to actually either choose a vertex, or I can just choose an edge off the bat, or I can just choose a face. So you can control whatever you want. For simplicity, I like isolating the different modes, so I know what I'm selecting. Okay, so just like I explained before on the move tools and scale tools, I can move these different components around. I'm gonna press G, I can translate and move in space. I'm gonna hold middle mouse click to make me move it up. And there, I've moved a vertex up. Now it looks very jagged and pointy, and that's not really a good look for what we're going for. There is something called proportional editing in Blender, and the hotkey for that is O. And it's a toggle button up here. Yeah, this little O-shaped thing. So if I control Z, right, and I try to redo that movement, so I'm gonna press G to move it around, you'll notice that there is this circle that appears, and now more of my mesh or more components are moving with it. This is similar to the soft select, if you think about it in that way in Maya. And I can change this range while in this mode by using the mouse scroll. So you can see I can change how minute my selections are, or how large I want it to affect everything. Right now, I just want to misshape this donut, this torus shape a little bit, so it looks a little more realistic. So I'm just gonna keep it down like this. I'll move it around. I'm gonna rotate and just move each vertex a little bit here and there, right? And I'm using middle mouse click to rotate around again, and shift middle mouse to pan, right? And for every movement, I'm moving it and pressing G to move, and left click to accept the movements. Now that's a little bit more misshapen. Let's say our baker wasn't the best at making these donut shapes. Okay, so great. And before I forget, to toggle out of edit mode, so you want to go back to edge mode. You want to toggle out of edit mode into object mode. Just press tab again, and you'll see your model like that. Now, if you want to preview what your model would look like if it was smooth, outside of edit mode, you can hold right-click over your object, and there is an option here. This will open up the object context menu, and there's an option called shade smooth. If I click on that, this will smooth my object, and it looks a little bit better. But you'll notice in the outline, it's still very jagged, and that's because this is only a preview. So if you were to export this model as a .obj, for example, and bring it into Unity, it's not actually going to look like this. It's more going to look like this. And only in Blender, this is supposed to be like a preview, like a shade smooth. And quickly, you can go back by just doing shade flat if you want those hard edges. Now, if you want to actually make it smooth, to like subdivide it, there's a thing called modifiers in Blender. If you go over here on the right side, there's a little wrench looking icon. If I press that, modify properties, and I have this object selected, hence the orange outline, I can go down here to a drop down menu, add modifier, and add a subdivision surface modifier. And there's like a lot of different modifiers here for many different things. But I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier, or a subsurf modifier. And now you'll see those jagged edges disappear. Right now, it's actually a lot smooth. If I were to go to shade flat, you'll see that its resolution was actually increased. Now, the cool thing about modifiers is that they're non-destructive, meaning that I can always adjust these modifiers on the go, and they're not actually applied to the model yet. So I can work with, I can like deselect and do something else somewhere somewhere else, and I can come back and still adjust these modifiers. If I want to apply the modifier, I just hit apply, and now that is my model. That's what it is. We'll bring that back. For the most case, you don't want to apply your modifiers right away until you're pretty much done and you're happy of how it looks like, or you want a certain component or element to be made. Another great thing about modifiers is that I can temporarily disable them, so I can see what it looks like without, and I can turn it back on later. If I want to get rid of a modifier, I can just press X. That gets rid of it. Or if I don't want to just see it, I can toggle this button, which is the edit mode modifier. Yes. Oh, sorry. This other toggle. It's called. It's a little computer screen, real time. Turn it back on and off. This one is for if I was in edit mode and I wanted to see the cage of it, then that's that. I can turn that off. It looks a little annoying. Or I can turn on this, and basically this conforms your cage to what is modified. Okay, quickly I'm going to go over the subdivisions here. You'll notice there's like 3 different little sliders. There's a render, viewport, and quality. Render, you don't really have to worry about too much. That's if you're rendering your scene in Blender, and this is how many subdivisions it will have later. So 2 is, is a lot more smooth. Right now, what you're seeing on your screen, your viewport, is this viewport slider. So if I increase this, you'll see, more smoothness, right? Let's just keep that at 1 for now. All right, and I'll toggle out of here. So this is looking okay. I'm just going to turn on shade smooth, so it looks a little better. Nice. Okay, so we have this little lumpy donut thing. Now I want to add some icing on this donut. So I'm going to go into edit mode by pressing tab, right? And I am going to select, I'm going to create the icing by just selecting like the top half of this donut, duplicating that, and then putting it on top, right? That's going to be my icing. I'm going to figure out how to do that. Really quick to snap to either side view or front view or top view. There are a couple hotkeys for that. You can go on your numpad. You can press 1, 3, 4, 7. There is 2, which is perspective, and then there's the other numbers, which I don't know what they do yet. To get out of this side view, I can just rotate the camera, and it will automatically come out. I can also snap to the side I want by, while I'm holding middle mouse to rotate, I hold Alt, and it'll snap to whatever view I'm in, like that. Okay, so now I'm going to select the top faces of my donuts. So I'm going to click and drag and select these faces, and I'm like, okay, awesome, I want to do that. And I'm going to rotate around to see, and you'll notice that my selection didn't go all the way through the model, and that's a little unfortunate because I want icing all around the donut, not just in one area. So what we can do is I'm going to snap to the view. I'm going to deselect that. Up here, there's these little shading, viewport shading modes. I'm going to click on this one, so it looks like a wireframe, which is the X-ray view. So I can see through the model. This way, I can actually click and drag and select the half of my donut all the way through, because I can see through it, which is fantastic, and which is what I want. I'm going to quickly toggle this back now that I have all of it selected. And to duplicate something in Blender, it's holding Shift, and then D. Now, when you duplicate something, you'll notice now when I move my cursor, it's immediately stuck to my cursor, like I'm moving it around. If I want it back in the same spot, right, all I have to do is cancel the movement, which is right-click. Or I can press left-click if I do want to move it along different axes. Right now, I want it to be sitting right at top of it, and I'm just going to add thickness to it later. So I'm going to hit right-click So it's back on there. Now in this state, because I duplicated those faces in edit mode, it's still actually one object. If I want to separate this, I just hit P for separate, and it's going to ask me if I want to separate by selection, material, or loose parts. You can choose any of these except for material, because it's the same material. Let's go with selection. And now, if I jump out of edit mode, the icing is a separate part from the donut. Okay, so that's what you see. Also, because it's duplicated, right now I have the donut selected. I have my modifier, my subdivision modifier still on, and on my icing model, I also have the same modifier that has been duplicated. And you'll see torus and torus 001 are separate objects now. Okay, now I want to give thickness to my icing that's on top of this donut. I can do that with another modifier. So I have my icing selected. I'm going to go to add modifier and go to solidify. Solidify basically adds thickness. It extrudes the model or inflates it out a little more so it is thicker. And I can change that here. I'm going to close this drop down. There's these settings for it, and there's a thickness option. I'll zoom in here so we can see the thickness of it. There is an offset, which is basically, let's say, where it's where the pivot is to extrude out. I can set that to 1, and it'll like start going inside and things like that. So I'm going to just set that to 0 because it's one with delay on top. And let's say that's like too thick actually. Just like that, good amount of thickness. You'll notice though that if we look on the side, the icing sort of like goes around the donut, and then there's a sharp, jagged edge or a point it makes that goes right in. This is because that the order of you applying your modifiers also matter in Blender. So right now it's applying my subdivision subsurf modifier, which is smoothing out my mesh and then adding thickness on top of that, right? So I want it to be more rounded on the bottom here. I can just move my solidify modifier, which is the thickness modifier, before my subsurface subdivision modifier. And I can do that by pressing these arrows. So now, and it gets piped from top to bottom. It's applying my thickness first, and then it's smoothing it out. So you see that it did smooth out a little bit more, and I can bump up the subdivision so we can see that. So now it's a little bit more rounded, and I can change the thickness so it looks a little bit better. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to close these drop downs. And while the modifiers are active, if I press tab to go into edit mode, I'm going to go to vertex mode. I'm going to move this icing or frosting around it just a little bit, so it's not just so obvious that it was just duplicated. So I'm going to select this vertex. I'm going to press G to move it, and I'm going to hit left click. You'll notice though that when I move it around like that, I may have to do some fudging around to get it to look like it's sticking on the donut. There is an easy way to do this, which is called snapping. So up here, there's a little magnet icon. If I select or toggle that on, and then go to this drop-down menu, which gives me the snapping, what component I want to snap to. I'm going to select face, right? Now that's going to do is every time I move something, it's actually going to snap to the closest face I move it to. So I'm going to hit G to move it. Now you'll see it looks like it's sticking onto the donut. You'll see this little orange circle hovering around where my cursor goes. Now you'll also see that when I move this around, two issues. part of the frosting goes into the donut. Okay, that is an issue with, I don't actually have that many subdivisions in the model. So the faces are getting stretched and at the same time trying to meet the point I'm dragging it to. I can fix that by adding some subdivisions. Okay, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Second issue is, as I move it around, the vertice I'm moving around is sticking to the surface, to my donut surface, but the other vertices that are affected, like in proportional editing, is not moving on the surface of the donut. So I'm going to cancel that. Go back up here, toggle this checkbox, which is project individual elements. Right now, if I move it, it should stick a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to fix the subdivision issue. If I select all of my components, and I can do that by pressing A. You can deselect all by pressing Alt A. So I'm going to select everything, use A. And then I'm going to hold right click, and now I'm in the vertex context menu, and there's a subdivide option. I'm going to click subdivide, and there's a box that pops open up here. It did a good job of adding more slices in the different faces. Subdividing and smoothing basically takes, one face and makes a cross section out of it, making 4 faces out of the 1 face. And it's doing that all around, and it's averaging our different components. So you can think of it as like doubling the amount of vertices or doubling the amount of edges or faces exponentially. Now in this little, if you look around on the side, it's doing a good job of it right now, but sometimes it may seem still a little bit too jagged. There is a smoothing option here, and it has 0 smoothness. If I turn this on, it's a little bit smoother. I don't know if you guys can see the difference. It's going straight like this. But if I turn this on, it smooths a little bit. I might turn off my subdivision so you can see. Right, so that's what it looks like. And then with smoothing, it smooths that a little more to average the distance between each vertice. Great, awesome, that looks great. Now that I have more resolution or divisions in my mesh, I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna select a vertice, and I have snapping to faces on, right? I'm gonna hit G to move it around, and it's doing something weird up here. It's like clipping around. I'm gonna lower my my range on my proportional editing, so now it's a little bit nicer, and I can move it, and it's sticking along that surface, which is nice. And I'm gonna do that all around, so it sort of looks like it was dipped in whatever frosting. Okay, so we have this lumpy dipped frosted donut. Great. Okay, one additional thing, I want to add some drips. I want to add some drops, as if it was just recently covered in this hot frosting. I can do that by selecting 2 vertices. So like I'm selecting the edge, or going to edge mode, and pressing E. Okay, E is extrude, which basically pulls out another face or edge from the existing component. So if I press E, right, automatically it sticks to my cursor because I'm moving it out, and it's just popped open another face. And you can see that since I also have the snap editing, it snaps to my surface, and I have proportional editing on too. So I can add like a little drip there. Nice, looks like it's dripping. I can make it smaller, so I'm going to select this edge, right? I'm going to hit E to extrude, take it out. I can press S to, okay, I'm going to press G, so it's moving. I'm going to press left click to confirm that. I'm going to press S to now scale it So it's more, you know, like a finer little drip. And we can adjust this by just rotating it around and checking what it looks like. Great. And you can extrude as many times as you want, right? So I can go like this and scale it down. And then I'm going to press E again, so it's even droopier. Right, and I'm going to move that. So it's there. You'll notice that this edge sort of flipped out on me. I can just Control Z, do that again, S to scale it down, right? And then you just go around doing all that so it looks less done in less than an hour. Just quickly add some drips around there. Okay, cool. And you don't want to do that too much, else it just looks it looks machine made right now. Anyways, so that's pretty much most of the modeling tools in Blender. Oh, so if I press Tab to get out of edit mode, you'll see that it is hugging the donut. But if I open up my Solidify Modifier, there is a crease option. If I increase my inner crease, you'll see that it makes the edge on the inside a little bit sharper. So it looks like it's actually on top. And that's about it. Some other things that can help in terms of shaping this frosting is that if I'm in vertices mode or any mode really, to select an edge loop, and these lines that go around in a loop, either horizontally or vertically, or what edge loops are, I can hold Alt and then click on the vertex and it'll towards a direction, select an entire edge, or I can go up here and I select that vertically. I'm going to select this bottom. And to invert your selection, you can press Control I, right? And to hide selections, you can press H. To get that selection back, it's Alt H, but I'm going to press H right now. Effectively, this is how you would also mask the different components you want to adjust. So I had like proportional editing on, but I didn't, let's say I only want to affect these bottom ring vertices. I can hide the top part and I can start moving it again like that, you know, and I can go around without affecting my donut. So Alt H to see it again and see how it's only pulled that one down, H again to hide it. We'll press Tab, get out of here. And yeah, that's our little like weird looking donut thing. That's basically all you need to know in terms of modeling anything in Blender. You can extrude a face, and you know, maybe I'll quickly do that. So if I select a face and press E, now there's some kind of growth out of this donut. I don't know. That's weird. I'm gonna Control Z that. Yeah, that's it. And if you want to add a color to it, on the right side in the properties window, there is material properties. And to add a texture or change the color of an object, you would need to add material. So in material properties, while it's selected, I'm going to press new material, and I can change the color here. Maybe I can go for like a pink. Right, you'll notice that it's not updating here, and that's just because the mode we're in, which is Viewport Shading, is just, everything is the same color. So we can just focus on modeling. If you want to see how it would look like if you were to render, or if the materials were being applied, toggle this button on the side here. And this is now what it looks like in a Unity scene, essentially, with the global lighting, our little pink donut. And I can go over here, select my actual donut, and assign that maybe like a brownish color. And that's my little brown donut. That's it. And if you want to add sprinkles, you would just, again, Shift A. You can add it like a bunch of cylinders, or you know, scale that down and do all of that. Yeah. So let me know if you guys have any questions. That's pretty much all there is to start modeling and get started with Blender. We have about 10 minutes left. If there is any questions, anyone pops up, or I can just go over some of the other tools, I guess, that are available. So just let me know. Oh yeah, and before we go, so you know, we went navigation, and the hotkeys I've been using are also typed on the slide, but if you also want to form a PDF, that is linked as well. At the end here, if you're interested in Blender and want to learn more, like I said before, there's so many tutorials online that are free. There's always someone making a tutorial in Blender, or whatever functions, and you know, Blender is constantly being updated as well. On the official site, blender.org, you can find a list of tutorials or documentation. If anyone's interested, the coding language what Blender uses is Python. Then you click around here, you can find out whatever's available, and these are all officially made. There's also a YouTuber called Blender Guru. He's an old-time Blender user, one of the old-time Blender users, and also has a tutorial on how to make the said donut that I was making. And he goes through actually from modeling to texturing to rendering a scene. So you can also follow that, and that goes over everything. And this is the PDF for the different hotkeys and shortcuts. So that's about it. I know it may have seemed like there was a lot, and there is a lot of hotkeys that might make it seem better to memorize. But again, for the most part, you only ever need these tools on the side here: move, rotate, and scale. And you can just click on these and do whatever you need to do. And yeah, that's about it. Actually, have a little bit more time. Let's say I want this donut to be selected as like one thing. We can combine these objects, but then you know, we get into we have to separate the materials, and so it still says, you know, separate. The colors still seem separated. So if I do that right now, hotkey to add selection is Shift, holding Shift, and then left click. So it's now both of it is selected. Let me get this out of the way. If I press, I think it's Control J, this, oh, okay, kept the colors. This combines the object into one mesh. It's not technically combined. They're separate components, right? If I select a component on the icing and then hit Control L, Control L basically selects everything that's connected to that face. You'll notice that it's not selecting the donut part because, you know, it was a separate piece. You'll also, okay, while I'm here, if you want to select a path, but you don't want it to go all the way around, you want to go up to a certain point, if you hold Control while one is selected, click on a second point, you'll select along that path. And there are different options to control this. Right now, this is set to pick shortest path. This little button here, and we can change that in somewhere. I don't know. But anyways, it's picking along the path. When I combine these two objects, you'll notice that the donut and now everything is sort of messed up. It changed. That is because when I combine these, get out of edit mode, if I go back to my modifier, the wrench, it's actually put all these modifiers onto one object. So not only is there smoothing on both of these objects at the same time, there is also the extrusion, the thickness, and we only want the thickness on the icing. So I'm going to Control Z all the way back before I joined it, so now that looks normal. If I do want both of these objects to be selectable, or as like one thing, I can create what's called a collection, which is like a group in Blender. So let's say I select both. I can press N. Oh, not N, sorry, M. And I'll actually ask me if I want to create a new one. I can create a new one. I can call this donut. Right, press OK. And over here, now it's made a little folder. And from then on, I can select the folder and move it around. I think it's not moving around. Yes. Or before you combine the objects, I can apply both of these modifiers and then select both and go Control J. And now it's one object, and the donut shape is the donut shape, and it's a singular object. So I think that is all the time we have. Just going to check. Yes, love Blender Guru. In the model viewer, will objects in the folder also stay together when exported? It should. Okay, this depends on the file format you export. If I export it as .obj while my group is selected, it's not going to keep the group organization. It'll just like in a way merge this into one object when it gets exported out and imported in. If you want to keep the organization of the group, you can export it as a .fbx. And this actually is a larger file size, but it keeps certain data sets that are more expensive. So .fbx can also store animation, but .objs can't. But they're smaller size and only stores models. Yeah, while I'm here, I can also talk about, so in the file export menu, there's .fbx here, and then .obj is the wavefront .obj. If by chance, right, you have your group selected and it's not exporting out because it's not really selected, actually, just select both of the objects, and if you export it as a .obj, it'll like combine it for you as one thing with the material, so like with these little colors. Yeah. And there's no other questions. I can end it here. Rule of thumb, just experiment around. Most of these things you can just like fiddle around and play with, and you never know what you're gonna get. Oh, sorry, super important thing. Last minute. If I press F3, this will actually open up a search bar, and I can type in any of the functions that I talked about today. So if I want to extrude, and I forget what extrude is, I can type in extrude. Oh. Okay, it's not called extrude. Wait. Oh, let me select it. Can I? Okay, I'm in edit mode. F3, extrude. Yes, okay, cool. Sorry. So your search toolbar is dependent on what mode you're in. I'm in edit mode, and I pressed F3. I can type in extrude, and now I see the extrude options, and it actually gives you the hotkey for it on the side. So that's extrude, and now I'm extruding. And I can do anything, to type in anything that you want. Like, let's say I want to add something. Getting out of edit mode, I want to add a sphere, or add a camera, or whatever. Or I can type in sphere, and I can add a sphere. So that's definitely really helpful. Yes. Okay. Awesome. I'm going to stop recording. If I can. Thank you all for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you, W.